This morning's reading is from Matthew 4, verses 23 to 5:16, and it's on page 968 in the Church Bibles. Jesus heals the sick. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and illness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all those who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you again for having us here today. It's really wonderful to be here. Right, in 2019, there was an Instagrammer, initially anonymous, called Ben Kirby, who started an Instagram account called Preachers and Sneakers. Now, for those not American, sneakers mean trainers or shoes. And he started posting famous American pastors, megachurch pastors, and what they would wear. So I'm going to flick through some of these. This guy's belt, $430. This amazing pair of shoes right here, $965. Possibly an even more amazing pair of shoes because they're $1,099. And this very stylishly attired guy here, that's a $4,000 suit. And I can't even read the shoes. But anyway, this caused some controversy at the time. Some controversy because I think people thought maybe that's not what we should be spending on what to wear. And there was some backwards and forwards in the Christian world in America where they were saying, this is bad. And they were saying, well, God's blessing us. God's blessing our ministry. And it gets mixed up in the prosperity gospel and things. And I think this is a pretty gross example of how we measure God's blessing. But I wonder, what do we think of as signs of God's blessing? What do we think of as signs of God's blessing? A peaceful life, perhaps? enough wealth, just enough wealth, maybe lots of wealth, comfort, lots of children, Christian children, well-behaved children, a successful job maybe, ministry in church, successful ministry, church involvement. Perhaps we see that these as signs of God's blessing in someone's life. Just think for a moment, what would you think of as signs of God's blessing? I wonder if we tend to think about things, people perhaps that are happy and appear to have life sorted. Well, today we're going to look at this amazing passage in Matthew where Jesus, we call it the Beatitudes, Jesus proclaims people blessed. We're going to look at who does Jesus proclaim blessed and what might that mean for us. Now, for us coming as mission partners, one of the things that we get trained in is taking off our cultural lenses and trying to see the world through the eyes of the people that we're trying to reach. So we're, in one sense, practiced at thinking, not how do I just see this situation, but how do the Thai people or how do our friends and neighbours see this situation? And doing this work of trying to see things differently is also true when we come to read the Bible. And we love this quote from a guy called Robert McAfee Brown that says this: "Where you stand will determine what you see. Whom you stand with will determine what you hear. And what you see and hear will determine what you say and how you act." Because when we come to the Bible, we also need to remember that the Bible was written by and for people on the underside of society, by people at the margins, oppressed peoples, the underdog, not the power holders. So let's pause just for a moment and think about Jesus. We're dealing with Jesus' words this morning. Jesus in his context, how he came to us in our world. And I'm going to get slightly geeky and medical here because I can't stop myself. But we remember when someone's pregnant, us doctors get all excited about, getting everything just right because life starts in the womb and gosh, don't get stressed. And if you've got all the right vitamins and minerals and is everything okay? And, prenatal stuff matters. Actually, genetics matters. Actually, epigenetics matters. All this stuff that comes before counts. And so Jesus starts right there, right? He was in a womb flooded with stress hormones. Mary, unwed and pregnant, and the social stigma and needing even to leave her town and go and be with Elizabeth to get away from it all. The stress hormones form this child that is Jesus, born into the world with a difficult start. Now the start gets more difficult because where was he born? In his home? No, elsewhere. So he's already displaced. He's born already in a difficult setting. Around the age of 2, then a refugee fleeing infanticide, huge trauma going on in this life. And then on returning to his home country, where did he return to? Galilee, the margins. And we're going to touch on that a little bit more. He grew up in a marginal community, and therefore, and with all that trauma, and therefore fully identified with what it is to be on the margins and to go through trauma. He was Galilean through and through, despite all of this stuff. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a Bible that has maps at the back, and when the preacher like me gets really boring, you flick to the maps and have a look, because that's what I always do, lose myself in geography briefly. So again, forgive me for being slightly boring, but this is first century Palestine. We're looking here at sort of the center, Jerusalem in the south. And in the north then, Galilee. Already far from sort of the center, the hub of things. And Galilee was a rolling hill country of fertile farmland, dotted with peasant communities that would farm their ancestral land. That hill country then sort of goes down and meets the Lake of Galilee and those familiar places that we hear about of Jesus' ministry, Bethsaida, Capernaum, places that are familiar to us. But we sometimes perhaps forget that first century Galilee was also occupied. These were an oppressed people group living under Roman rule. In Galilee, there were 2 imperial cities built by the Romans. Sepphoris in the hill country was there to collect tax from all of this farmland. And then in AD 20, so as Jesus was probably a young man, they built Tiberias on the Sea of Lake Galilee. And with the building of Tiberias, an influx of Roman military presence, more Roman mouths to feed, heavier taxation, more commercialization of the fishing industry. This was at a time when the economy was switching from grow what you can and swap it in the marketplace to cash, 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 cash. We need money, and because money has to go to the Romans. So the people that he belonged to, who Jesus was in context, this is an oppressed people who are struggling, squashed by an occupying force. It's thought that at the time of Jesus, for an average person in first century Palestine, up to 60% of their income went on taxes. That's taxes to the Romans and also temple tithes. So the demands of these taxes, exploitative taxes on the people, made life extremely difficult. And the people that Jesus grew up amongst were struggling, distressed, poor. Perhaps just one bad harvest away from going down that slippery slope of debt, perhaps needing to sell out from their land and become tenant farmers, not keeping up with payments, not keeping up with taxes, perhaps even losing their ancestral land. This was a common thing happening amongst Jesus' people group. So pause for a moment and to imagine their distress. The things that the people are going through at that time and how that would make life for them, how they would feel about that. And maybe even what sort of questions they had about their God. Does God even love us? Is he there? Is he strong enough? But the situation for them doesn't stop there. So they're distressed. But also for the Galilean people, under all of this pressure, they had little time for proper religious observance, to travel down to Jerusalem, to the temple, even possibly to perfectly keep the Sabbath. They were trying to survive under this exploitative taxation. So this meant that they were looked down on by their own people, by the religious leaders in Jerusalem. They looked on the Galilean peasants as impure. So not only were they already suffering, but they were also not good enough in a religious way. And even more than that, the dominant worldview at the time was that if you were suffering, if you were going through hardship, it was because you had sinned in some way and God was punishing you. So if you had a disability, or you were poor, or diseased, or whatever, it was because you had in some way sinned and God was punishing you. So the people that Jesus is speaking to are not just sad, they're bad. They're not just oppressed, distressed, at risk of losing their land. They're also viewed as impure, not good enough, possibly even cursed by God. The people sat around Jesus on this mountainside are these people. The ones that don't perhaps quite keep the Sabbath, that don't make it to Jerusalem, that are really struggling. It is exactly to these people that Jesus pronounces them blessed. He says these words to these people: "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." It's remarkable. He doesn't wait for them to be better than they are. He doesn't say, I'll let you off those Sabbath. You are blessed. As you are, you, in all of this stuff, you are blessed. He is redefining the identity of these communities, these village communities. They're not less than, they're not to be despised. They carry God's blessing. In other words, if you want to see where God's blessing is, you don't go to the elite in Jerusalem. God's blessing is right here amongst the poor, struggling people in Galilee. So who does Jesus pronounce blessed? Jesus pronounced blessed unexpected people. In our setting in Thailand, it's easy. In one sense, we see parallels between these Galilean peasants and the people that we live amongst. In Thailand, they have that same worldview. If you are suffering, it's because you did something wrong. Karma, they call it gamma in Thai. It means you must be bad if your life situation is not good. So if you're poor, you must have done something wrong, or your parents or your parents' parents. It's just the suffering that you fully deserve. And also, much like the oppressed Galileans, many people are just the Galileans might be one bad harvest away from falling down this slippery slope. For our neighbours, sometimes it's a couple of sick days off from work and they won't make the rent that month. And then they might borrow money from the wrong types of people, and then violence, and then it's a pretty rapid downfall into destitution, really. And it's the vulnerable that suffer most. Hopefully you had a sense of that from the Klongtoi Beatitudes video we showed earlier. We need to hold on to the truth that God blesses exactly those types of people. He pronounces blessed exactly those types of people. The people and places of blessing might not be what we were expecting, but God pronounces blessed exactly those types of people. Now I want to bring it to our response, really, our little part in God's big mission in the world. If Jesus pronounced these types of people blessed, what are we to do about it? Well, I love the bit in Luke 4 where Jesus explains what his mission in the world was. We call it the Nazareth Manifesto. So he's been, it's the beginning of his ministry. He's gone to the centre. He's been in Judea. He's been baptised by John. He's gone into the wilderness, and he goes back to Nazareth. And it says he went to Nazareth where he'd been brought up. So he's back on the margins up in Galilee. And on the Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue, as was his custom, and he stood up to read. The scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." I mean, it didn't go very well because they then tried to push him off a cliff, didn't they? But anyway, this is how Jesus understood his own mission in the world. I love that. This is how he understood his mission. If he said to Jesus, "How do you understand your mission in the world?" This is what he said. This is the beginning of his ministry, his life ministry. And he understood his messianic function in the world as this. Good news to the poor. freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. Set the oppressed free. He's grown up in Galilee. He's a Galilean man. He knows what this looks like. We've just celebrated Easter, haven't we? Defeating sin and death and rising again in power. Jesus, what's it all about? Oh, it's about this. That's how he understood his mission. His kingdom is here. Resurrection Sunday, we just had it. His kingdom is here. And it turns all this stuff upside down. The oppressed won't be squashed at the bottom. They will be lifted up. That's his kingdom function. The people who are trapped, they will be set free. That's a kingdom function. It's good news to the poor. If it's someone, I can't remember, someone said about the gospel, if it's not good news to the poor, it's not good news. And I love it as well that throughout, all through the Gospels, Jesus never once says, worship me. But he repeatedly says, follow me. Because following Jesus is our worship. We worship. Of course we worship Jesus. We do it by following. So we do what he did. As we make our way in this world, we try to follow the example of Jesus. I love the bit in Philippians 2 where it says, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who took this downward journey. So our worship is following in this mission that Jesus describes as his mission. As we follow Jesus, part of our mission is to proclaim blessed those that Jesus would proclaim best. So perhaps not the happy and the ones whose lives look sorted, but the sad and the bad. That's turning things around a bit, isn't it? Who are we to pronounce as blessed in this world? The sad and the bad. If we, like Jesus, choose to spend our time with those, that's where we'll see God's blessing. And I'm not saying I understand it all, because I don't at all. It's a mystery. How you can say or look at somebody's life whose situation hasn't changed and yet say they have the blessing of God on them, with them, in them, and yet the circumstances look awful. I don't understand it all. But it seems to be what Jesus is saying. God's, and it links that through the whole Bible, God's on the side of those people throughout the whole Bible. Theologically, it gets called his preference for the poor. Preference, I don't understand the word in this context. His preference for the poor. He's on the side of the underdog. He does lift up the oppressed. He proclaims blessed the sad and the bad. Perhaps we would do well to get as close as we can to those people if we want to see and share and have a part in this real blessing of God. So I'm going to stop now, but we'll pause just for a moment and just think to yourself, as we did with the Klongtoe Beatitudes video, just think to yourself, who might God be calling you to pronounce blessed?